Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Today I will be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 7, The Son of Drona Punished, Text 5. So, do you have the verse on your device? Or, yeah? So that you can. 175. Okay.
Yes, we can see March.
Okay. Jaya samohito jiva.
Jaya samohito jiva.
Atmanam trigunatmakam.
Atmanam trigunatmakam.
Aropi manute nachtam.
Aropi manute nachtam.
Tat kritam sa vipatyate.
Tat kritam cha vipatyate.
Jaya samohito jiva.
Jaya samohito jiva.
Atmanam trigunatmakam.
Atmanam
Paropi manute nachtam.
Aropi manute nachtam.
Tat kritam sa vipatyate.
Tat kritam cha vipatyate.
Jaya samohito jiva.
Jaya samohito jiva.
Atmanam trigunatmakam.
Atmanam trigunatmakam.
Paropi manute nachtam.
Aropi manute nachtam.
Tat kritam sa vipatyate.
Tat kritam cha vipatyate.
So we will have the word-for-word translation now. I just will read it. No need to repeat because that may be difficult online. But I just read it. Jaya, by whom? Samohita, illusions. Jiva, the living entities. Atmanam, self. Trigunatmakam, conditioned by the three modes of nature or a product of matter. Paraha, transcendental. Api, in spite of. Manute, takes it for granted. Anachtam, things not wanted. Tat, by that. Kritamsha, reaction. Abhipachyate, undergoes thereof. Translation and purport by Abhay Charanavinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. Due to this external energy, the living entity, although transcendental to the three modes of material nature, thinks himself as a material product and thus undergoes the reactions of material miseries. I read the purport that the root cause of suffering by the materialistic living beings is pointed out with remedial measures which are to be undertaken and also the ultimate perfection to be gained. All this is mentioned in this particular verse. The living being is by constitution transcendental to material engagement, but he is now imprisoned by the external energy, and therefore he thinks himself one of the material products. And due to this unholy contact, the pure spiritual entity suffers material miseries under the modes of material nature. The living entity misunderstands himself to be a material product. This means that the present perverted way of thinking, feeling, and willing under material conditions is not natural for him, but he has his normal way of thinking, feeling, and willing. The living being in its original state is not without thinking, willing, and feeling power. It is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita that actual knowledge of the conditioned soul is now covered by nescience. Thus, the theory that the living being is absolute impersonal Brahman is refuted herein. This cannot be because the living entity has its own way of thinking in its original unconditional state also. The present conditional state is due to the influence of the external energy, which means that illusory energy takes the initiative while the Supreme Lord is aloof. The Lord does not desire that the living entity being that the living being be illusioned by the external energy. The external energy is aware of this fact, but still she accepts a thankless task of keeping the forgotten soul under illusion by a bewildering influence. The Lord does not interfere with the task of the illusory energy because such performance of the illusory energy are also necessary for reformation of the conditioned soul. An affectionate father does not like his children to be chastised by another agent, yet he puts his disobedient children under the custody of a severe man just to bring them to order. But the all-affectionate Almighty Father at the same time desires relief for the conditioned soul, relief from the clutches of the illusory energy. The king puts the disobedient citizens within the walls of the jail. But sometimes the king, desiring the prisoners' relief, personally goes there and pleads for reformation. And on his doing so, the prisoners are set free. Similarly, the Supreme Lord descends from his kingdom upon the kingdom of illusory energy and personally gives relief in the form of the Bhagavad Gita, wherein he personally suggests that although the ways of illusory energy are very stiff to overcome, one who surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Lord is set free by the order of the Supreme. This surrendering process is the remedial measure for getting relief from the bewildering ways of the illusory energy. The surrendering process is completed by the influence of association. The Lord has suggested, therefore, that the influence of the speeches of saintly persons who actually realize the Supreme, men are engaged in his transcendental loving service. The conditioned soul gets a taste for hearing about the Lord, and by such hearing only, he is gradually elevated to the platform of respect, devotion, and attachment for the Lord. The whole thing is completed by the surrendering process. Herein also the same suggestion is made by the Lord in his incarnation of Vyasadeva. This means that the conditioned souls are being reclaimed by the Lord both ways, namely by the process of punishment by the external energy of the Lord and by himself as the spiritual master within and without. Within the heart of every living being, the Lord himself as the super soul Paramatma becomes the spiritual master, and from without, he becomes the spiritual master in the shape of scriptures, saints, and the initiator, spiritual master. This is still more explicitly explained in the next sloka. Personal superintendence of the illusory energy is confirmed in the Vedas, the Kena Upanishad, in relation to the demigods controlling power. Herein it is also clearly stated that the living entity is controlled by the external energy in a personal capacity. The living being, thus subject to the control of the external energy, is differently situated. It is clear, however, from the present statement of Bhagavatam that the same external energy is situated in the inferior position before the personality of Godhead or the perfect being. The perfect being or the Lord cannot be approached even by the illusory energy, who can only work on the living entities. Therefore, it is sheer imagination that the Supreme Lord is illusioned by the illusory energy and thus becomes a living being. If the living being and the Lord were in the same category, then it would have been quite possible for Vyasadeva to see it. And there would have been no question of material distress on the part of the illusioned being, for the Supreme Being is fully cognizant. So there are so many unscrupulous imaginations on the part of the monist to endeavor to put both the Lord and the living entity in the same category. Had the Lord and the living entity been the same, then Srila Sukadev Goswami would not have taken the trouble to describe the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, for they would all be manifestations of illusory energy. Srimad Bhagavatam is a summum bonum remedy for suffering humanity in the clutches of Maya. Srila Vyasadeva therefore first of all diagnosed the actual disease of the conditioned souls. This is their being illusioned by the external energy. He also saw the perfect Supreme Being, from whom the illusory energies were removed. Though he saw both the diseased conditioned souls and the cause of the disease, and the remedial measures are suggested in the next verse. Both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living beings are undoubtedly qualitatively one, but the Lord is the controller of the illusory energy, whereas the living entity is controlled by the illusory energy. Thus, the Lord and the living beings are simultaneously one and different. Another point is distinct herein that eternal relation between the Lord and the living being is transcendental. Otherwise, the Lord would not have taken the trouble to reclaim the conditioned soul from the clutches of Maya. In the same way, the living entity is also required to revive its natural love and affection for the Lord. And that is the highest perfection of the living entity. Srimad Bhagavatam treats the conditioned soul with an aim to that goal of life. I read the verse once again. Jayasa moito jiva atmanam gunatmakam paropi manute nachtam tatketam sapi pachate. Due to its external energy, the living entity, although transcendental to the three modes of material nature, thinks himself as a material product, and thus he undergoes the reaction of material measures. Omajana timrandasya chinanchana shalakya sexual miritam yena tasmai shiko venama chitchetayamanopistam stapitam yena bhutales vamrupkadamayam dadati svapadantikam Vandiyam Shiyuda Padakalam Shigum Vaishnavam Sha Shirupam Jagajatam Sakanaragnatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savdutam Parijana Saitam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sakanavita Shivishakam Vitam Sha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Chat Pate Kopesha Kopkakanta Radha Kanta Namastate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwe Vishabhana Sutadevi Pranamama Hripriye Pancha Kautra Vishake Pasan Vevisha Padnam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavyo Namana Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki. So in this verse, this is the first of 3 verses in which Srila Vyasadeva describes his realizations. Because his spiritual master Narada Muni had asked him to meditate with devotion on the absolute truth. And from there, then write by his realizations, write the Srimad Bhagavatam. But here this realization are described in 3 verses. He sees the material and the spiritual worlds, and between the Vyacha river, which separates them. And he sees that the conditioned soul, they are on the wrong side of the river. So we are on the wrong side in the illusory energy. And all the other living entities are in the spiritual world. So this purport is very important. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, and he writes that the living entity has its own thinking, feeling, and willing in the unconditioned state also, in the liberated state, unconditioned state. Srila Prabhupada says that means, but what does it mean? That when we are in a spiritual body, then we have our own thinking, feeling, and willing. The spiritual body has its own thinking, feeling, willing, its own memory. But somewhere or other we were in the spiritual world, and we got the wrong desire. The desire, what would it be to be Krishna for a moment? And then, of course, Krishna is also the servant of all living entities. And he helps us to fulfill our desires. So if we develop selfish desires, then Krishna says, okay, you want to control, you want to be the controller and the enjoyer. But there is one problem. Krishna says, Bhaktaram Charatapasam Sarvalokam Ashvaram. Because I'm the supreme enjoyer, because I'm the proprietor of everything. But if you want to think yourself the proprietor and the enjoyer, then there is one problem. You have to forget me. Otherwise, there is no fun. So that's the first difference between the living entities in the spiritual and the material world. In the material world, everyone has forgotten Krishna. And one puts oneself in the center. And in the spiritual world, there everyone puts Krishna in the center and serves Krishna out of love. But the point is, this our spiritual body. The spirit soul means spiritual body also. Srila Prabhupada explains that the spiritual senses are there, but they are covered over with a subtle and a gross body. But they are there, but they have become inactive. Because the spiritual body can only be used for spiritual purposes. Means it can only be used for serving Krishna. That if you want to use your spiritual body, your own thinking, feeling, and willing for selfish purposes, with the spiritual body, that's not possible. It's not made for that. From the moment you desire that, Krishna makes arrangement that you get first the subtle body. And this subtle body has material intelligence and material intelligence and material thinking, feeling, willing. The material mind is created. And that's the first thing what happens. Because to fulfill material desires, you cannot even think about it with your spiritual body. But the soul desires, and we desire, yes. But to fulfill that desire, Krishna gives us a subtle body and a gross body. And Krishna said, okay, you are in the kingdom of God, but if you want to forget me, you have to go to a cloud a black cloud in the spiritual, in the kingdom of God, which is that I'm not much used to say during a Sunday feast. Yes, good news, we are all in the kingdom of God. Bad news is we are in the prison section. So that's the point. That's where we are, in the prison section. And when you go to the prison, you get a new outfit. You get a T-shirt with a number on. So you get new clothes. So we get clothes, a subtle body first, the underwear, and then the overcoat, the gross body. And that is just this. So this thinking, feeling, and willing is our thinking, feeling, and willing in this material world is done not by the spirit soul itself, but by the material energy, the subtle body. That and this subtle body is made of the three modes of material nature. And that's not good news, because these material modes of material nature, they are all contaminated with selfishness, that the mode of goodness less than the mode of passion and ignorance, but the desire is there to enjoy and control without Krishna. That therefore we got this subtle body, and the subtle body is the cause, is the cause of the gross body. Because to enjoy this and to exploit this material world, you need a gross body. But that's constructed according to the mentality of the subtle body, that according to what we desire. So that is what Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport. In the unconditioned state, we have our own thinking, feeling, and willing, and we have to get that back. Therefore, we have to get rid of this subtle body. And how do we get rid of this subtle body? Well, that Krishna says, because the subtle body has three elements: buddhi, manas, and ahankar. And in this purpose, Srila Prabhupada speaks about ahankar, false ego. The living entity identifies himself wrongly with this body, with this subtle body especially, with this mind and this intelligence. So therefore, yoga means the first thing to do is to control this mind and not to identify with this mind. Identifying with the mind is a cause of all miseries. But we need to control it. That's what Krishna explains at the end of the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita. To control the mind, the first thing you have to know is that the Atma is the most subtle element. And then you have the buddhi, material intelligence. That's the most finest of the material elements. And then manas, the mind, the senses, the sense objects. So first, one must understand that how this subtle body is constructed and how to control it. How to control it. So first, to understand this more deeply, we have to understand the difference between liberated and conditioned. In the Uddhav Gita, there in Canto 11 of the Bhagavatam, it's chapter 11. There at the beginning, Uddhav is asking Lord Krishna, please tell me about symptoms of liberated and conditioned souls. And what's the first thing what Krishna says? The spirit soul is never liberated and is never conditioned. We think we are liberated or we think we are conditioned. No, it's the consciousness coming from the spirit soul which is polluted by these three modes and made us identify with the material nature. And we need to wake up from that. And Lord Krishna explains to Uddhav, like at night, you dream and you get up and you think, oh, it was just a dream, a temporary illusion. But a person who is spiritually enlightened, Lord Krishna says, he thinks that life of the body is a dream, starting with birth and ending with death. And it's all temporary between. And it's all done by material nature. All this illusion. We think we are this body. I'm a father, a mother. These are my children. This is my country. And so many things. And we become attached to it. And we suffer. It's a big illusion. But one who is liberated, he wakes up from that. And Lord Krishna tells Buddha further, if one comes out of this illusion, what's called liberated, then one engages in devotional service. That's the way to come out of it. And one becomes so absorbed in love of Krishna that one forgets about the body. One identifies himself again with the spirit soul by devotional service. Because devotional service means acting as a spirit soul, not as the body. And then after that, Lord Krishna in Uddhav Gita speaks about Vraja Prema, the devotion of the Vrajavasis. And he says that is beyond renunciation, that's beyond the body concept of life. And that's the goal. But to attain that goal, we have to get rid of our anarthas. Now go back to the purport here. How do we get back our original thinking, feeling, and willing? That's important, which is done by the spirit soul. And now it's done by the material elements, by the buddhi and the manas. Thinking, feeling, willing, activity of the mind, accepting, rejecting. That's what the mind does in this world. That attachment, aversion, that's created. And it's all related to the body. The more we absorb in attachment and aversion, the more we identify with the body. And so these are the anarthas. Anarthas means unwanted things, things that block us, points that Krishna calls it attachment and aversion, are obstacles on the path of spiritual realization, attachment and aversion. So we need to purify ourselves, and that's what Srila Prabhupada in the purport described as reformation. We have to come to Pumartha Mohan. The real Artha is love for Krishna. That is the normal consciousness of the spirit soul. In other words, due to the contaminated consciousness in this subtle body, those bodies are constructed, and we are going to the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. And that subtle body is with us since time immemorial. So the point is how to get rid of this subtle body. We have to kill it, destroy it. But we can only destroy it by spiritualizing it, purifying it to the point that it is purified. To that point, will we regain our feeling for Krishna, our thinking, feeling, and willing for Krishna. And that's what Queen Kunti says. Janmasya Shudashbir Edamana Mudamparam Naivra Datum Vai Tvama Kinshana Gocharam. That there are 4 intoxications, he says, that prevents us to pray with feeling, spiritual feeling. That and that is the Janma, thinking we have an aristocratic birth, Ashvarya, thinking attached to riches and wealth, that and Shuta, Shibir, then Shuta thinking, yes, I'm a great scholar, that I know things, and Shibir, I'm so beautiful, and that all temporary things in this world which belong to the body. So the point is how to purify or spiritualize the subtle body. So how do we purify the mind? Krishna says, Manmana, think of me. So that's the way to purify the mind. That purification of the mind by thinking of Krishna. Krishna is antiseptic, prophylactic, Shriya Upanishad said. When we think of Krishna, then we are purified from this lust, anger, greed, and so on. And how do we purify the intelligence? The intelligence is purified by transcendental knowledge. Therefore, Krishna says, yes, that we must hear about Krishna. We must hear Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam every day. The Bhagavatam can give us liberation. But we need to hear the Bhagavatam every day. And need every day also Bhagavad Gita. And be very serious in it. Guru Maharaj, Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj said to his disciples, you should memorize the verse of the Bhagavatam class for the next day, every day. But unfortunately, no one of his disciples could do it. But that's the idea. Yes, we should learn the verse and be serious. Because this knowledge, when we hear this knowledge, of course, the material body is not us. That's right. But when we hear this knowledge and fill our intelligence with it, which is an instrument that we use in this world, so the mind and intelligence are instruments we use. And who is we? The soul. So if we hear sufficiently about Krishna, then the soul will direct the intelligence. How does the soul direct the intelligence? The soul directs the intelligence by attachment. The soul desires. And the soul instructs the intelligence, yes, follow that, do that, act as a spirit soul by following this knowledge. And by this faith, the intelligence will control the mind by engaging the mind and the senses in the service of Krishna. And that's the path for liberation. But we first have to hear, because that's what we discussed before. That is what this attachment of the soul. Satam prasangam mama virya samvido. And before Krishna in 3:25-23, that prasangam achampasam atmana kavayovido saisa sukrito sadasukrito moksatvaram apavritam. When one becomes attached to things in this world, it's a cause of entanglement and further identifying with the body. But we can call conditioned. But attachment to the sadhu, if this attachment is transferred to the sadhu, then we are on the path of liberation. Because the sadhu tells us, Satam Prasangam Mamavirya Samido Bhavandrit Karna Rasayakin Nakata. The sadhus, the satam, the pure devotees, Mamavirya Samido, they discuss these powerful pastimes of Krishna. Because if we hear about Krishna, we understand who Krishna is, who we are, and that it is our natural activity to love Krishna, and loving means service. And then we understand also by hearing how Krishna has created this world, how Krishna controls material nature, and how by surrendering we can come out of it. So that's all explained in this purport. It is basic knowledge, but this basic knowledge should never leave us. It's so important that realizing how we are conditioned in this world and now identifying with this body, causes so much suffering. This morning we had a Bhagavatam class here in Kolokadam, I'm in Germany. There we discussed about, Lord Vishnu advised Indra to ask Dadichi for his bones, because Dadichi had become very powerful by chanting Narayan Kavacha, and from his bone, then they could make the thunderbolt for Indra to kill Vitrasur. And they asked, the demigods went to Dadichi asking for his bones. And he first said, oh, don't you know that it's a duty of every living being to protect his body first, and then secondary following religious principles. Anyway, but he spoke jokingly. because it was ordered by Lord Vishnu and it was okay for him to leave his body if his body would be used in the service of Krishna. So, and it's the order of Lord Vishnu. So he was not at all affected. So that's a sign of being on the spiritual platform. But I spoke about the reactivation of the spiritual body. There are other instances in the Bhagavatam which shows the effect or shows how this spiritual body becomes again active. We have the story of Bharat Maharaj. At 50, he went to the forest. He was meditating. He came to the level of bhava, preliminary stage of prema. That's beyond liberation. Beyond liberation. Liberation is nistha. When we are free from all our anarthas. He was free from all these anarthas. And he went to Ruchi, Asakta, became attracted to Krishna and to bhava, a very high stage. But then we know that he became attached to a deer in the forest. And he fell down from his position. But we may not forget that Krishna says in 240 of Bhagavad Gita, 240, Nami Bhakta Pranashyati, my devotee never perishes. If you read that talk of Srila Prabhupada, it's very interesting. He said, if you're in this life, you have developed 5% Krishna consciousness, that's never lost. Next life, you start with 5%. But on the material platform, whatever you have realized in your life, it's gone. And next life, you have to start from zero. So that's interesting. It's never diminished, Krishna says. Therefore, when Bharat Maharaj became a deer, in the body of a deer, he could remember everything what happened. He went back to the ashram and was hearing from sages, Bhagavatam, the scriptures. And then in his next life, he became Jat Bharat. And immediately he remembered again everything. That means his spiritual body was again active. So that is the point. When we come on the spiritual platform, our consciousness is not interrupted anymore by the material energy. So that gives faith that to get back our original thinking, feeling, and willing. And the process here is described: surrendering to Krishna, hearing about Krishna, so that the soul gets faith and directs the intelligence, and then the intelligence directs the mind, the senses, and engages it continuously in devotional service. So this is important, that because it's by thinking of Krishna, the mind becomes purified. And by hearing about Krishna, the intelligence becomes purified. And if the intelligence and the mind is completely pure, then there's no false ego anymore. And then you have attained the position of Jivan Mukta, a liberated soul. You are, even though you are still in this body, then you are liberated. And since the material intelligence, material mind is gone, it is spiritualized, your own spirit soul becomes active again. And when at the time of death, then you leave this body and you don't get a new, you become free from the coverings and you go back to the spiritual world, your spiritual body. So that's what is explained more or less in this purport. There are so many important points. And Krishna comes and performs his pastimes for that purpose, to bring us back, for the reformation of the spirit, of the spirit soul. Reformation. Krishna says, Ananda Sintayantavam Yechana Paripasya Tesam Nitya Bhuktam Yogashemaranyam. He says, yes, I give my devotee, but I protect the spiritual advancement of my devotee. And I give him all what he needs to make spiritual advancement. You read this purport of Prabhupada. That's the meaning, this verse. So Krishna gives us what we need. And sometimes Krishna gives us what we need, but what we don't want, but we need it. And that always, therefore, if you are engaged in devotional service, Krishna gives us exactly what we need to make spiritual advancement. Therefore, I remember always the words of Bhakti Charumaharaj, which he personally instructed to me. He said, whatever good or bad happens in your life, see it as a mercy of Krishna. And that is what it is. That I got to understand that more deeply only later on. But this is a very deep instruction. That good. That any questions, comments, please.
I have one question. Can you hear me?
Yes, Rasraj Krishna. Hearing you good. Fine.
Thank you so much for the class. Yeah, I had a few questions. My first question is, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that once you go to the spiritual world, past Brahmajyoti, once you enter into my abode, there's no coming back. And so is there a chance that like Jay and Vijay, they didn't really fall down. They were brought down, but because they're in Vaikuntha, they can't really fall down. So my question is that, is there a possibility that the material world in a certain time of creation or in a certain moment of Krishna's kingdom, the prison won't be needed? Is there a time there won't be a need for prison, or the prison will be vacant because everyone's gone to the spiritual world?
Yeah.
So it's like a nearby question. I'm sorry, Maharaj.
Yeah. First, on your first point, Srila Prabhupada asked, where someone asked Srila Prabhupada, it's in Bhagavad Gita, when we go to the spiritual world, we don't come back, Srila Prabhupada. But if one wants to come back, can one come back? And Srila Prabhupada said, yes. And that's the case of Jai and Vijay. They desired a good fight with the Supreme Lord. They wanted to serve him, to give him a good fight. And this could not be done in the spiritual world. Therefore, they had to come to the material world. And the Lord made arrangement that they be cursed by the four Kumaras, so that they could fulfill their desire to fight with the Lord. Three lifetimes that Yes. But what was your other point again? That
would there in the kingdom of God, would there sometime be a moment where the prison would be vacant?
Yeah, this is in Chaitanya Charitamrita. There you have Vasudev Datta said to Lord Chaitanya, please transfer all the sins of all the living entities in this universe to me and let them go back to the spiritual world and let me remain here suffering for them. And Lord Chaitanya said that even if I would fulfill your desire and they would all go to the spiritual world, the material world would again immediately fill up with other living entities. So that's the point. The living entity as the soul desires, and we can desire what we want. And unfortunately, there will always be guys or souls like us who desire the wrong thing, and therefore we are here. So there's always a come and go from the spiritual world to the material world. That's unfortunate, but that's true. The prison section will always be there. It's utopian to think in this country there will be no prison needed anymore at any moment. Anyway, with Kali Yuga progressing, that the material world, you are inside the prison or outside the prison, you are a criminal against the law of God. That's why we're here. Does that help, Rasaraj Krishna?
Yes, thank you so much, Maharaj.
Oh, something else?
So I have a question. So on the same thought pattern that this previous question is going, so in different yugas, people were highly elevated. So they were more elevated than we were. They were more in the mode of goodness. What brought them here? If they were able to have their what is it like? They were able to just hear and remember, or they were in meditation. They were higher than we were, right?
Yes.
So why were they on the Earth planet then? They still had desires?
Yeah.
Obviously.
It is said when we come from the spiritual world, you don't fall down immediately to the lowest level. You first become Brahma in the universe. And then from there, yes, you degrade. So yeah, you have these 4 yugas. In the Satya Yuga, you have those in the mode of goodness. But unfortunately, the mode of goodness is also binding and conditioning. That it's a better situation, but it's not that they were spiritually situated. No, but they had great facility to meditate and to elevate them spiritually. They were close, to goodness. But we may never forget also that Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, so in this material world is goodness, passion, and ignorance, and they are always competing with each other. So pure goodness is not there in the material world, and we see that also. There are stories in the Bhagavatam, stories in Satya Yuga, and things were also going wrong there. So it's not an ideal situation. But for us devotees, it's important to live in the mode of goodness. We are creating our own Satya Yuga within our, but we have to live in a community with devotees. Therefore, it's so important that we live together, that outside of this material world, that therefore Bhakti Maharaj wanted all this project to develop, so to give facilities to devotees, that so that they can live together and elevate themselves that live in a mode of goodness. It's not easy as Kali Yuga progresses. And also in our temples, I'm observing signs of deviation from this lifestyle. And it's so important. I know Bhakti Ramaj was very strong. You have to dress as a devotee and follow strictly everything in a mode of goodness. But yeah. Does that help?
Yes, that's
Yeah, thank you. Good. So thank you. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I have one question.
Yes, Mother Prema Pada. Yes.
Maharaj, you said that we are body, we are soul, we are not body. So I was thinking then, when we are soul, why does when we get cut and pinched and everything happens, why does we experience that? Why does the mind experience that pain?
Yeah, that's a good question. That the mind experiences that pain because that's the arrangement by material nature. But the point is, we are not the mind. If we identify with the mind, we experience this pain as our pain, as a pain of the soul. And that's called false ego. So the first thing we need to learn in our practice is not to identify with the mind, but to observe the mind. And not to take the mind too serious. That and the more we absorb in this pain and the more we absorb in the body, the more we suffer. Krishna consciousness means we focus on Krishna in our service and we forget about his body. That and then you can tolerate. I've seen Guru Maharaj for the years. He accepted so many disciples. And unfortunately, I realized that if you are accepting disciples are not always following strictly. And the Guru takes all the karma. And I've seen every time I saw Guru Maharaj, he was sick practically. But he just went on. He didn't speak about it, and he was focusing on his service. So he was not really experienced this suffering by his Krishna consciousness. He identified as a soul, not as the body. And that is important, that we have to learn not to focus on the body. We have to get it running nicely and follow all the instructions of Krishna, balanced, enough sleep, not too much, not too less, eating, moderate, very little for a devotee. That if you follow that balance, it will be more easy to control the mind. Controlling the mind and not absorb it, not identifying with the body, but this identification is there for so many lifetimes, and we are accustomed to it. And it's difficult to rule it out. But yes, I've also personally the experience that if I focus on my service and on Krishna, I'm thinking of Krishna, then I don't feel it suffering much. It goes to the background because we identify with the soul. We don't have much time for this absorption of the mind. But that comes naturally when you become spiritually advanced. We cannot imitate that. In the beginning, Shilpa Guru Maharaj used to say you are like a weightlifter. That the weightlifter doesn't lift again in one time the big weight, now it's going, builds up. So we have to build up and learn how to 24 hours engage our mind in Krishna and not in the body. And because that's very important. I heard Guru Maharaj saying to Vishveshvar Prabhu was an elderly devotee. He left Godbrother who left his body 2 years ago in Radhavesh. Yes, he told them in Italy that was 20 years ago, because he was already sick at that time. He said, when the time comes to leave this body, Guru Maharaj said, that you must think I'm not this body. You must come in identifying with your spiritual identity. And that's important. That if we die, we identify with this body and we identify with this pain and so on. We take birth again. So that's something we have to learn during our lives by cultivating Krishna consciousness. It's not just at the end of, because if you don't cultivate Krishna consciousness during your life, you will identify with the mind also at the time of death. So we have to learn to observe the mind. And that principle is explained in Bhagavad Gita 2:70. So this verse says, as rivers are entering to the ocean is not disturbed. So we should not be disturbed by all these feelings of so-called happiness and pain in the mind. It has nothing to do with us. Nothing to do with us, really. It's the body. It's the modes of nature. But we can only come out of this identification if we have a good spiritual sadhana and hear sufficient. And by that we get spiritual strength not to identify with the mind. But it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. That our attachments to this body and so on goes. Krishna gives us tests that we want honor, we want this, we want that, all for the body. But Krishna gives us what we need. The required doses of frustration that we don't want it anymore. And we give it up. And that is His mercy. So, Prema Prada, Matajiva. Does that help?
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
I try my best.
Yeah.
Good.
Maharaj, if you have time, I have a question.
Yes.
She's a little
Pranasham.
difficult to explain. A wonderful class, Maharaj. As you mentioned, we need to purify the mind, intelligence, and false ego will automatically get purified. Intelligence, Maharaj, you mentioned about if we keep on hearing, then the intelligence will purify. But for mind, Maharaj, you mentioned that thinking about Krishna, and earlier also you were explaining. But what would be the practical ways, especially for us here in Deland, if we want to increase our process of purifying the mind, what should we do?
Yeah, that's the first thing is Shravan, hearing. That because it's important that we develop the ability to engage ourselves always in devotional service. So we have to do many things during the day, also practical service. But like what I use this. This is a kind of MP3 players, and when I put it on, we'll hear
music.
So that's Srila Prabhupada. The lecture after lecture comes. I heard all these lectures on Bhagavad Gita, one after another. So you do other services, you cook.
The following is a class on the Bhagavad Gita as it.
You do so many things, but make sure you have a good doses of hearing during the day. That's very important. That we have to plan things, we have meetings. Before the beginning of the meeting, you chant Hare Krishna. That's nice. You read a verse and a purport, and then we have a meeting. Try to dovetail everything with Krishna as much as possible. I would say that, because if we don't hear sufficient, we don't get absorbed in the purpose of what we are doing, really. That's so being absorbed. That Srila Prabhupada said read 2 hours a day. But if we have a morning program and an evening program, the morning Bhagavatam and the evening Bhagavad Gita, you have already 2 hours. And during the day you can chant and hear that when you have time and do practical service. It depends on what service you do. My service is mostly guiding others, giving lectures, and I have to prepare them. And that's mostly I have no time to study. I prepare lectures and seminars. That's the way. Yeah, good. Thank you. It was wonderful to be with you, and I'm looking forward to see you next week. Jai Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Very good.